This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this is episode 761 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, go buy the Late Round Prospect Guide. That's it. That's my promotion of the guide for today's show. Go buy it on lateround.com. Crush your rookie drafts. Let's answer some mailbag questions. The first question this week is from Twitter. It's from @Mike0803. It says, what impact will Charbonnet's draft have on Seattle's backfield, particularly Kenneth Walker? One of the top topics this week in fantasy circles has been the Zach Charbonnet pick and what it all means for Kenneth Walker. I talked about the pick itself on Monday's episode, giving reason as to why the Seahawks made that pick. I really think it comes down to two things. The first being that Kenneth Walker had the worst success rate among 100-plus attempt running backs last season, and his rate of gaining positive yardage per rush was also worst in the league. He was a home run hitting running back. So they paired him with Charbonnet, who was good at picking up tough yards without that same type of big playability. But there's also pass catching, which I think is just as important. Kenneth Walker was not a good pass catcher in college. You guys got sick of me bringing that up last year. His 5.4% best season reception share was really, really low, and his yards per route run in college never exceeded 0.77 in a single season. Charbonnet's, meanwhile, was never below that mark, and during the two players' final seasons, Charbonnet had basically triple the yards per route run compared to Walker. And then all the while, Charbonnet had more than double Walker's best season reception share. And this is all coming after a season where Walker didn't do that much as a pass catcher. He ranked low in PFF's receiving grade among running backs. He was one of the worst in the league per route run. And he averaged about a 7.5% target share per game when he took over that backfield. That's nothing special. I think it would be silly for anyone to defend Kenneth Walker, the receiver, the pass catcher. Defending Walker, the rusher, that makes a lot more sense. He can be electric with the ball in his hands. He was the best pure runner in last year's class. But the Charbonnet pick hurts him. Not because that early down work is just going to vanish, but because the receiving ceiling is now going to be tougher to achieve. I think there's at least some chance that Charbonnet becomes a favorite for that coaching staff if he ends up hitting, if he ends up being a good player. But I want to be clear here. Just because I'm explaining why the Seahawks may have made the Charbonnet pick, it doesn't mean I think he's going to outperform Kenneth Walker in fantasy football. I still think that Kenneth Walker's the favorite there. My point is more so there are a lot of people out there who seem to think that this is not that big of a deal. That it's a deal, but it's not a big one. That's where I disagree. Before that pick, Walker had hope to be an every down back. Now, I've had him as a sell all offseason, but I still recognized that it could go in that direction. With the Charbonnet investment, those odds have dropped considerably. He's going to need Charbonnet to bust as a player in order to maintain that value or get hurt. My early projections see Walker as more of a low-end RB2 with upside. That's for 2023. That's off of a 52% rush share in that offense and about a 5% target share. Maybe you feel more optimistic than those numbers. But I think the numbers are logical when you figure the player that they just drafted and the investment they made to get him. And yeah, it's the Seahawks. They love their running backs and they value the position more than the rest of the league. But it's not like Charbonnet himself is a bad running back. He was projected to go in round 2, maybe early round 3. And I will say this, the backfield's a little bit different in best ball leagues where you won't have to worry about how things will go down each week. But I did want to at least get this out there, because it was easy to take what I said on Monday and think that I just like Charbonnet more. Kenneth Walker is still projected to be the better fantasy asset. But I do think I'll be lower than consensus on Walker. But that hasn't really changed. I've been lower on Walker than the consensus. And I do think that Charbonnet is at least somewhat of a threat. Somewhat of a threat to be the 1A in that offense down the line. He's a good running back who does things that Walker doesn't do. And that, in turn, limits Walker's ceiling. The next question is from Patreon. It's from Garrett. It says, hey JJ, with rookie drafts gearing up and with there being a general expectation that there will be no true consensus rankings with this year's class, One of the fantasy football strategies that isn't talked about much among analysts is utilizing game theory within their rankings. That's to say, if you rank a player as your 7th best prospect, but you know that the majority of the market will not view him that way, would you actually take them at 7, or would you try to play it differently based on what you know about the market because you know that you can extract more value? In general, how would you actually play your rookie rankings? So rookie drafts are different than a normal season-long draft or a dynasty startup draft. There's a lot more variance involved because we've never seen these guys play before in the NFL. In those other drafts, we generally know the type of players that we're drafting, so they're easier to predict, and that means less variance. All the while, there's another layer of variance this year with rookie drafts, and that's ADP variance. There's definitely a whole lot of volatility in rookie drafts when you get into the second round, at least in like super flex leagues. It'd be mid to late first round in single quarterback leagues. You can study rookie draft boards and see that the first round is pretty straightforward through about Zay Flowers. And then the second round is generally all over the place from one draft board to the next. You're going to still get an average of all those boards though. That's your average draft position. But that average draft position is more than likely not going to be as obvious or locked in as what we've seen in the past. In the past, a lot of times you generally knew what you would be looking at in the middle of round 2. This year, you really have no idea in Superflex leagues. Because there's so much volatility, it makes it harder to do what you're saying in this question, and that's to play the ADP game to extract value. Volatility means that ADP itself is volatile. It's not just that your rankings disagree with ADP. It's that ADP is all over the place. So in your given draft, things are going to be all over the place. But this really depends on your overall approach to these drafts. I would say that if there's one guy that you absolutely don't want to miss out on in the second round, just draft him. Don't try to extract value. Because like we're both saying here, there's variance. So you may or may not have a shot to get that player later. In the past, in other drafts, you might have been able to play that game a little bit easier. Like if you really like Marvin Mims and you absolutely want him and only him, and you have the 202 in a Superflex league, just get Mims. He usually goes later, but if that's your focus, just get your guy. Now, if your consideration set is a little bit wider than that, if you have multiple players that you like and you can play the odds that way, that's a little bit different. Like if you're into Mims, Jaden Reed, and Jalen Hyatt, let's say, and you have the 202, then yeah, you can trade back and cross your fingers that one of them falls. Because your probability in getting one of them increases a whole lot because you have 3 guys to choose from instead of 1. But if there's one player you really want to target, just get your guy. You don't get many shots in your rookie draft. There's too much variance involved with prospecting to strictly try to extract value, in my opinion. The next question is from @thewizard49. It says, I'm very interested in the Josh Downs versus Jaden Reed prospect model versus your rankings. So something that I've noticed more this year is people questioning my rankings versus my prospect models rankings. And that means that I haven't done a good job communicating. In the late round prospect guide, I have a cheat sheet for what my prospect model is saying and how it ranks my players. It's completely objective based on the model. I then have my own personal ranking sheet that has more subjectivity built into it. I inject my own personal thoughts into those rankings. And those are the rankings that I follow during drafts. They're all guided by the model. I say this all the time, but prospect models to me aren't there to make all of your decisions for you. They're a guide. If there's a player who has a far better prospect score than another, then I'm going to almost always side with the player with a far better prospect score. But this year, there are a lot of wide receivers who are sort of clustered together in that 82nd to 86th percentile range. Marvin Mims, Jaden Reed, Josh Downs, Jalen Hyatt, Jonathan Mingo. Those are the wide receivers. And so in the guide, I essentially went with what I saw because I watched these guys too, their opportunity, their fit with their new team, and then I ranked them accordingly. And remember, some players still have very scary analytical profiles, even if it looks fine in the model. Jalen Hyatt is a perfect example of that. He looks good for where he got drafted, and I think he's a fine draft pick in rookie drafts. But he still has a scary analytical profile. I don't let landing spot dictate my rankings a ton because landing spot changes. But when you've got players clustered in prospect score, you can use landing spot to help navigate how to rank them. And that's what I did with Josh Downs. My model likes Downs. I think he's got Tyler Lockett in his range of outcomes. But I'm not in love with him going to a team with a mobile rookie quarterback. He would have been better off in a spot with a pocket passer who can pepper him in the slot. And the reason I like Reed more is because there are a lot of positives to his profile. There are a lot of negatives too. Don't get me wrong. He's an older prospect. He's not an early declare. He saw his final season production dip. I mean, there are things that we can say about Reed that are not good. But this is the problem in approaching it that way with this year's draft class. We can say the exact same thing with any of these wide receivers. Josh Downs is small, and he might only be a slot guy at the next level. Jalen Hyatt had semi-fraudulent numbers, is going to be asked to play the perimeter more than likely, but he played 87% of his snaps from the slot in his only productive season in college. Marvin Mims never had elite production and played in a weaker conference. What if Marvin Mims is just another KJ Hamler? Jonathan Mingo's production profile is nothing special. We've got this cluster of players who all have warts. And like I just said, we have to be real with ourselves when we're approaching things in fantasy football. There's variance. There's a ton of variance with these rookies. So to me, it's a go with what you feel most comfortable doing thing. Do you like Josh Downs more than Jaden Reed? That's totally reasonable. Would you rather go with Marvin Mims or Jonathan Mingo? That works too. I understand that people want me to have strong convictions. It's my job to rank these guys and help tell you who to pick. And I do. I think all of the first-round wide receivers are in a better spot than the other wide receivers in this class, the guys that I just mentioned. I'd rather have Dalton Kincaid and a couple of running backs over these wide receivers. But I tier players for a reason. They're players who are generally interchangeable in rank. And when there's a clear drop-off, when I can say, I'll definitely take this guy over the next, that's when a new tier is formed. This is also where their profiles come into play too. You can choose your own adventure by reading up and seeing what you like and what you want. That's why I break down all of these players in the guide. A player like Josh Downs probably has a higher floor than Jonathan Mingo as a player. But Mingo probably has more of a ceiling given where he lines up, his size, and his landing spot. But this is how I embrace variance and not walk away from every single rookie draft with the exact same players. And I understand that some of you are only in one rookie draft, but you can still embrace variance. If you're in a lot of leagues, even just 2 or 3 of them, by not diversifying, you're saying that there's no variance in this. But there's a ton of variance, so embrace it. This next question is an email from Adam, and it says, I've got DeAndre Swift on my dynasty roster and was hoping that he would go to a good landing spot after the Lions took Jahmyr Gibbs. He then went to Philadelphia. It seems like his dynasty stock is on the rise. Do you agree? What is Swift's outlook as an Eagle? I think his stock is on the rise versus how low it was after that Jahmyr Gibbs pick, for sure. But I also think that people may be overrating this landing spot in Philadelphia. I think Swift is better than what we saw from him last year in Detroit. They barely used him on the ground, but he had a target share per game rate of 15%. And he's been efficient. The problem is that I've done research on how mobile quarterbacks impact their personnel in fantasy football. And it's generally not a plus thing, especially as it pertains to running back target share. The Eagles ranked dead last in running back target share last year. They've got 3 extremely good weapons in their passing game that are going to command a high target share. It's not going to be easy for Swift to get a 15% target share in this offense. A 10% share? That's definitely doable. 11%? Maybe. But 15% is asking for a lot. And if he's getting a 10% target share, that's just not a special number. We're going to need him to see more work on the ground. When before last year, he was around the 45%, 50% running back rush share per game mark in that Detroit backfield. And that's running back rush share. That's what's key. Now he has Jalen Hurts to compete with on a total rush share standpoint. Miles Sanders last year had a 71% running back rush share per game rate. That equated to a total rush share of 47.6% because Jalen Hurts is a factor. So he doesn't look as good as you might think in my initial projections for that reason. He's more like an RB3. You can boost him up a little bit from that because there is some upside, of course. But I've seen people have him as like a rock solid RB2. I just don't see how you can have him ranked that high. And let's not ignore the fact that the Lions openly and abruptly replaced DeAndre Swift. That's not a positive indicator of him being as talented as we think. We shouldn't have all the confidence in the world. When teams openly and quickly get rid of players, that's not a good sign. We can't sell it that way. Now, my opinion can certainly change, but I just have a feeling that someone in my draft is typically going to like Swift more than I do. And I liked him at the beginning of the offseason. I think the best ball is probably a little bit different because of his big playability. I just don't know how predictable that production is going to be. This next question is from @SomeDad5. It says, we've heard a lot this offseason about how great this tight end class is, but also what a bad investment tight ends are as rookie picks. How would your rookie rankings change in leagues that require starting 2 tight ends? So I did that episode a handful of weeks ago on investing in rookie tight ends, showing that they appreciate and value at a worse rate than running backs and wide receivers. The problem for this season in particular is all the variance stuff that I've been talking about on today's show. With there not being locked in situations and players who are obvious second round picks, it makes taking a Dalton Kincaid in the late first or a Sam Laporta in the early second a lot easier. So I do think that this year, now that we're post-draft, it will look a little bit different for tight ends. And regarding your question about how rookie rankings change in leagues requiring 2 tight ends, well, those tight ends become a lot more valuable. You're increasing the demand of the position. You're then lowering the baseline player at the position. You need more of them. So you're all of a sudden drafting those guys closer to where first-round wide receivers are getting drafted. But that also assumes that you're still starting 2 running backs and 2 or 3 wide receivers. I think people get that wrong a whole lot. They see that they're starting more than 1 tight end, which is a big deal. But if you're starting 3 times the number of running backs or 3 times the number of wide receivers, it's all relative. So in that case, it's not as significant of a bump. The last question this week is another email. It says, hey JJ, love the pod and the guide. Thank you. With the 2023 NFL draft in our rear view, what are your entirely too early thoughts on which 2023 rookie running backs will be looking over their shoulder and possibly, quote, Algiered this time next year, the way guys like Pollard, Rashad White, and others are sweating it out this year? For example, Tajay Spears and Chase Brown come to mind for me. Thanks, @DFF_SJonathan02 on Twitter. I think Spears and Brown are 2 very good candidates for this. And I'll just be straight up. Spears scares me. Flat out. I never saw a workhorse profile for NFL purposes when I was prospecting him, and my model reflected that. He's undersized and he got by on efficiency in college, not volume. Now, I think that he can be a good committee back in the NFL, a really good one. Like pairing him with Derrick Henry in the short term makes plenty of sense. But Pro Football Doc sent a tweet out about Spears the other day, and it's not a good one. It's about his knee. And the tweet said that he expects him to have a short NFL career. So that just plays into the idea that he won't carry a huge workload. So if Henry is gone next year, and let's say that Spears is good in a complementary role, I would not expect Spears to survive the draft or free agency. Chase Brown's interesting because Joe Mixon could be gone sooner rather than later. And I like Brown the prospect. He's one of my favorite dart throws from day 3. But yeah, it's a day 3 pick on a team very likely to be competing in 2024. The chance that they don't add a back to that backfield if they do lose Joe Mixon, it seems slim. Unless Brown just really, really shows up. Like Isaiah Pacheco. Zach Evans is another one. I don't think Evans is a workhorse in the NFL, and he doesn't have a great receiving profile. He's a fine dart throw in rookie drafts, whatever. He's going late enough, it doesn't really matter. No one in that range has a good profile. But if we assume that Cam Akers is gone next year, which is very possible, then Evans would also be in one of these situations. And I'm not going to be overly optimistic about a day 3 guy. It just doesn't make any sense to. You can play the odds and you can still draft these guys, but to think that they're going to be starters in 2024, that's kind of foolish. So those would be my 3. Spears for sure. I think he's the most obvious one. And then from day 3, Chase Brown and Zach Evans. Like I said, it doesn't mean that these guys are bad investments. We saw a player like Algier still appreciate in value. That can definitely happen with Brown or Evans. But any day 3 running back is not very stable. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks for listening, everyone. Greatly appreciate all the support during draft season. Enjoy your weekend, and I will talk to you next week.